The first person who stopped laughing was the Whitaker's attorney. His smile disappeared halfway through a sentence as he reread Clause 14 for the third time. Across the 12-foot dining table, Stefan West, a 38-year-old security contractor from Charleston, sat quietly in work boots, still dusted from a job site. Lauren's family had spent months treating him like the poorest man in the room. What they didn't know was that the most dangerous thing about Stefan wasn't the money he had. It was the paperwork he understood. Before we get into the story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. And if you enjoy stories where patience beats arrogance and facts beat assumptions, subscribe to the channel. There's another story waiting for you tomorrow. The Whitaker estate sat on nearly 6 acres overlooking the Ashley River. From the road, it looked less like a family home and more like the headquarters of a company that had accidentally become a mansion. Tall white columns, 3-car garage, a circular driveway lined with imported palm trees. Every detail seemed designed to remind visitors exactly how much money lived there. Stefan West parked his aging Ford F-150 beside a row of luxury vehicles, a black Range Rover, a silver Mercedes S-Class, a Porsche Cayenne. His truck looked like it belonged to one of the contractors maintaining the property, which in a way was exactly how the Whitakers viewed him. Stefan shut off the engine and sat quietly for a moment. The truck's dashboard clock read 6:42 p.m. Dinner was scheduled for 7. He reached into the passenger seat and grabbed a simple navy blazer, no designer label, no expensive watch, no attempt to impress anyone, just clean clothes and polished boots. The same approach he used for almost everything in life. The front door opened before he reached it. Patricia Whitaker greeted him with a practiced smile, the kind people used when they were being polite without being warm. "Stefan," she said. "Mrs. Whitaker." "Everyone's already here." He noticed the emphasis on everyone, as if arriving 7 minutes early somehow made him late. Inside, the house smelled faintly of fresh flowers and expensive furniture polish. Family portraits covered the walls, award plaques, photographs from charity galas, magazine covers featuring Whitaker Development Group. Success had been framed and displayed in every hallway. Stefan followed Patricia into the dining room. Conversation stopped for half a second, just long enough. William Whitaker sat at the head of the table, 62 years old, silver hair, perfect posture, the face of a man accustomed to being obeyed. To his right sat Lauren, beautiful as always. Dark blonde hair, blue dress, perfect smile. Yet something about that smile felt different tonight, less natural, more careful. Jason Whitaker sat beside her, 36, vice president of the family company, expensive suit, expensive haircut, expensive confidence, and at the far end of the table sat Bradley Haynes, the Whitakers' attorney. Stefan recognized him immediately. Charleston legal circles weren't enormous. Haynes represented some of the wealthiest families in South Carolina. "Look who made it," Jason said. A few people laughed. Stefan simply nodded and took his seat. Dinner began. Steaks arrived. Wine was poured. Conversations drifted through business deals, real estate projects, and country club gossip. Stefan listened more than he spoke. He noticed something he had learned years ago. People often revealed the most when they believed nobody important was listening. Jason spent 10 minutes discussing a waterfront development project. William corrected him twice. Lauren barely touched her food. Bradley checked his phone several times. The atmosphere felt strangely rehearsed, as though everyone was waiting for something. Finally, William set down his fork. The room became quiet. "There is one matter we'd like to handle before the wedding." There it was. Stefan looked toward Lauren. She avoided his eyes. "Interesting." William nodded toward Bradley. The attorney opened a leather briefcase and removed a thick document, nearly 50 pages, heavy paper, professional binding, prepared well in advance. Bradley slid it across the table. The document stopped directly in front of Stefan, A prenuptial agreement. Nobody said anything. The silence itself carried a message. This wasn't a discussion. This was an expectation. William folded his hands. We thought it best to handle this now. Stefan looked at the cover page, then at Lauren. She finally spoke. It's just a precaution. The phrase sounded memorized, like she'd practiced it. Jason chuckled. A family like ours has to be careful. Stefan said nothing. Bradley smiled professionally. This is standard for situations involving significant family assets. Standard. Interesting word. Stefan opened the document. The pages rustled softly. He began reading. Most people would have skimmed. Most people would have signed. Most people sitting at that table expected exactly that. But Stefan had spent years reviewing contracts, vendor agreements, security installation contracts, commercial leases, insurance disputes. Words mattered. Tiny details mattered even more. Several minutes passed. The room grew restless. Jason checked his watch. William drank wine. Patricia stared out the window. Stefan kept reading, page after page. The agreement heavily protected Whitaker family assets. That wasn't surprising. What caught his attention was something else. Certain sections were unusually aggressive. Future earnings, future acquisitions, future business interests. The language stretched far beyond what most prenuptial agreements typically covered. Stefan continued reading. The deeper he went, the more questions appeared. Not answers. Questions. He reached page 37, then 41, then 46. Nobody at the table expected him to read the entire document. That alone seemed to irritate them. Finally, Jason leaned back. You planning to memorize it? More laughter. Stefan ignored him. His eyes moved down another paragraph, then another. Then he arrived at section 14. His expression didn't change, but something registered. A small detail, easy to overlook, extremely easy, especially if someone assumed the agreement only existed to protect one side. Stefan read it again, then once more. The room waited. William's patience visibly thinned. Everything all right? He asked. Stefan closed the folder, not dramatically, not angrily, simply closed it. The sound echoed softly across the room. He placed both hands on top of it, then looked directly at Bradley Haynes. The attorney maintained his smile, but Stefan noticed something, a flicker of uncertainty, just a fraction. Enough. No, Stefan said calmly. The room froze. William blinked. Jason laughed immediately. I knew it. Patricia sighed. Lauren's face tightened. Bradley remained silent. Stefan pushed the agreement back across the table, about 6 inches, nothing more. I'm not signing this. The laughter started almost instantly. Jason laughed hardest. William shook his head. Even Patricia smiled, as if a child had just said something unrealistic. Stefan waited. He let them laugh, because people often became careless when they felt superior. Finally, the noise faded. William leaned forward. You understand what this is, don't you? Stefan nodded. I do. Then why refuse? Stefan looked at the agreement one final time, then at Bradley. The attorney no longer seemed quite as comfortable. Stefan tapped a finger lightly against the closed folder, exactly where section 14 rested beneath the paper cover. One tap, nothing more. Then he asked a simple question, a question so ordinary that nobody at the table understood why Bradley suddenly stopped smiling. And for the first time that evening, the attorney didn't answer immediately. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The silence felt heavier than the laughter that had filled the room moments earlier. Stefan kept his eyes on Bradley Haynes. Not on William, not on Jason, not even on Lauren. The attorney was the only person whose reaction mattered, because Bradley understood exactly what Stefan had asked. What happens, Stefan had said, if one party signs this agreement after receiving incomplete financial disclosure? Simple, direct, and apparently uncomfortable. Bradley adjusted his glasses. For the first time that evening, he looked down at the document instead of at Stefan. William noticed. So, William asked, Bradley cleared his throat. That would depend on the circumstances. A careful answer, too careful. Stefan noticed the change immediately. Jason did not. Jason leaned back in his chair and laughed again. Oh, come on. He pointed toward the agreement. You think my father is hiding money? Patricia looked offended. Lauren looked embarrassed. William looked annoyed. Only Bradley looked cautious. Stefan said nothing. He simply reopened the document and turned several pages. The room watched. He stopped at section 14. The clause occupied less than half a page. Small enough to ignore, dangerous enough not to. The language was straightforward. Both parties acknowledged that the agreement relied upon complete and truthful disclosure of all material assets, liabilities, business interests, trusts, partnerships, and holdings. Failure to disclose such information could result in invalidation of protections granted by the agreement. Stefan had read thousands of pages of contracts over the years. Most people focused on what contracts gave them. Few people paid attention to what contracts could take away. This clause did both. He looked up. When was the disclosure package prepared? Bradley answered. Approximately 6 weeks ago. And has it been updated? Again, hesitation. A few minor revisions. Minor, another interesting word. Stefan closed the agreement once more, not because he had finished reading, because he had seen enough. William finally lost patience. This is becoming ridiculous. His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to ending conversations. Nobody is trying to trick you, Stefan. The words sounded reasonable. But Stefan had learned years ago that reasonable words often appeared right before unreasonable requests. William continued, This family has spent generations building what we have. Stefan nodded. I understand. Then why are we sitting here arguing over paperwork? Because paperwork was where the truth lived. Not speeches, not appearances, not family reputations. Paperwork. Stefan knew that. The Whitakers apparently did not. Lauren finally leaned forward. Stefan, her voice was softer than the others. We're getting married. He turned toward her. For a moment he saw the woman he had fallen in love with. Not the daughter of William Whitaker, not the future heiress of a development empire. Just Lauren, the woman who used to eat seafood baskets with him on Sullivan's Island. The woman who once spent an entire Saturday helping him paint a rental property. The woman who used to laugh without checking who was watching, but something had changed, and Stefan had been noticing it for months. Small things, tiny things, the kind people ignored until they formed a pattern. She had started talking more about status, more about money, more about appearances, less about building a life, more about maintaining one. We're supposed to trust each other, Lauren said. Stefan studied her expression. Trust. The word echoed strangely inside his head, because trust required honesty, and honesty was exactly what Section 14 addressed. That's true, he said quietly. Lauren seemed relieved for a second, then Stefan added, which is why complete disclosure matters. The relief disappeared, not dramatically, just enough. A slight tightening around her eyes, a subtle shift. But Stefan noticed. He always noticed. Jason slammed a hand against the table. Oh my God, he laughed. Listen to yourself. Nobody joined him this time. Even Patricia remained quiet. The atmosphere had changed, not because Stefan was winning an argument, because people were beginning to realize he wasn't having the argument they thought he was having. William stood from his chair, slowly, deliberately. The movement alone silenced the room. Let me make something very clear. Stefan listened. If you marry my daughter, you will never have to worry about money. There it was. The assumption, the foundation beneath everything. The belief that money was the thing Stefan wanted. That was the mistake. Not the only mistake, but the first one. Stefan had spent most of his adult life allowing people to underestimate him. It made life simpler. Clients revealed more. Competitors became careless. Arrogant people exposed themselves. Being underestimated was often useful. William continued, But if you refuse to sign this agreement, we will have serious concerns. Stefan nodded. What concerns? Jason answered before his father could. That you're after the family money. The statement hung in the air. Stefan almost smiled, not because it was funny, because it was predictable. He looked around the table. Nobody appeared shocked by Jason's accusation. That meant they had discussed it before tonight. Interesting. Very interesting. Lauren lowered her eyes. That hurt more than the accusation itself, because she wasn't surprised either. Stefan suddenly realized something. This dinner had never been about protecting assets. The decision had already been made. The judgment had already happened. The prenup was merely the formal expression of what they believed about him. He was the outsider, the risk, the unknown variable, the man fortunate enough to be invited into their world. Stefan sat quietly. The room waited. William expected him to defend himself. Jason expected him to become angry. Patricia expected him to apologize. Lauren expected something. Stefan wasn't entirely sure what. Instead, he asked another question. Who prepared the disclosure schedules? Bradley looked up immediately. The attorney answered before anyone else could. Our office. Stefan nodded, and all assets were disclosed. The attorney hesitated again, only briefly, but long enough. William noticed this time. His eyes moved toward Bradley. The attorney felt it. Everyone did. To the best of our knowledge, Bradley said. Another careful answer, another answer that wasn't quite a yes. Stefan filed that away. Years in business had taught him something valuable. When professionals started speaking carefully, there was usually a reason, and reasons left trails. The conversation eventually ended without resolution. Nobody wanted to continue, not after the mood had changed, not after Bradley's confidence had developed cracks. Coffee was served. Dessert arrived. The dinner limped forward, yet nothing felt normal anymore. Stefan participated when necessary, answered questions, maintained politeness, but his attention had shifted elsewhere. He was observing, collecting details. William avoided discussing company finances. Jason changed subjects whenever disclosure appeared. Bradley became increasingly quiet. Lauren barely spoke at all. By the time Stefan finally left the estate, the river beyond the property had disappeared into darkness. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and sat motionless for several minutes. The mansion glowed behind him, millions of dollars in real estate, generations of wealth, influence, connections, power. Most people would have been intimidated. Stefan wasn't, because the question now wasn't whether he would sign the agreement. The question was why certain people seemed nervous about him reading it carefully. He pulled onto the road and drove toward downtown Charleston. Streetlights reflected across the windshield. His phone remained silent. No messages from Lauren, no apology, no explanation, just silence. The same silence that usually appeared when people hoped a problem would disappear on its own. Stefan reached his house shortly before midnight. A modest waterfront property most Whitakers would probably consider ordinary. He carried the prenup inside, placed it on the kitchen table, then opened his laptop. The document sat beside him, Section 14 visible under the lamp. Outside, waves moved gently against the dock. Inside, Stefan began searching public business records. At first, he expected to find nothing, just enough information to satisfy his curiosity, nothing more. But 23 minutes later, he found the first discrepancy. And suddenly, he wasn't reading a prenuptial agreement anymore. He was following a trail. The first discrepancy appeared at 12:17 in the morning. Stefan stared at the screen for nearly 30 seconds before moving the cursor again. It wasn't a smoking gun, not even close. It was simply a name. A limited liability company registered in South Carolina 18 months earlier. Harbor Crest Holdings, LLC. The name meant nothing to him, but the registered agent did. Whitaker Development Group. Stefan opened another browser tab, then another, and another. The search that began as curiosity slowly became a process, a methodical one. Years earlier, when he first started his security company, Stefan had learned something about investigations. The truth rarely appeared all at once. Usually it arrived as fragments, addresses, names, dates, transfers, tiny pieces that meant nothing individually and everything together. By 1 in the morning, he had identified 3 separate LLCs connected to Whitaker interests. None appeared anywhere in the disclosure schedules attached to the prenuptial agreement. That alone wasn't proof of wrongdoing. There were legitimate explanations. Inactive companies, dormant assets, administrative oversight. But Stefan didn't believe in assumptions, not when documents existed. He shut the laptop and went to bed. Sleep came slowly, not because he was worried, because his mind kept replaying Bradley's hesitation, twice, maybe 3 times. An experienced attorney didn't stumble accidentally, not over a clause like Section 14, not unless something was bothering him. The next morning began like any other. At 6:15 a.m., Stefan was already at a job site on Meeting Street. A regional medical supply company was upgrading its security system. Cameras, access controls, remote monitoring, nothing unusual. His crew arrived shortly afterward. Most of them had worked with him for years. Mike Hernandez, Terry Collins, Chris Walker. Good people, reliable people, the kind who cared more about doing quality work than talking about it. Stefan spent the morning reviewing installation plans, checking cable routes, testing equipment. By lunchtime, he had almost stopped thinking about the Whitakers. Almost. Then his phone vibrated. Lauren. He looked at the screen for several seconds before answering. "Hey." Her voice sounded cautious, not angry, not warm, careful. "Hi." A pause followed, the kind that used to feel comfortable between them. Now it felt crowded. Lauren spoke first. "My father thinks things got a little tense last night." Stefan almost laughed. A little tense. An interesting description. He said that, yes. Stefan glanced toward the technicians installing access panels across the building. "I see." Another pause. Lauren exhaled softly. "You embarrassed him." There it was. Not concern, not confusion, not curiosity about the disclosure issue. Embarrassment. Stefan leaned against a wall. He invited his attorney to present a 50-page contract at dinner. That's not the point. No, it wasn't. That realization settled heavily inside him. Lauren wasn't asking why he had concerns. She wasn't asking what he found. She wasn't asking whether something might actually be wrong. She was focused entirely on the reaction, the appearance, the social damage. The Whitakers cared deeply about appearances, maybe more than he had realized. "What exactly is the point?" Stefan asked. Silence. Then Lauren answered, "The point is that everyone feels like you don't trust us." Stefan looked out a nearby window. Downtown Charleston stretched beneath a bright blue sky. Traffic moved slowly. Construction crews worked across the street. Normal life, real life, not country clubs and family estates. Trust. The word again. Always trust. Never verification, never transparency, never disclosure, just trust. The conversation ended politely. Neither raised their voice. Neither solved anything. When the call finished, Stefan stood quietly for several moments. The distance between them felt larger than it had 24 hours earlier, not because of the prenup, because of how Lauren viewed the situation. That bothered him more. Later that evening, Stefan drove to Mount Pleasant. Ryan Mercer was waiting at a small waterfront restaurant overlooking Shem Creek. Ryan had spent 15 years working as a forensic accountant. Banks hired him, law firms hired him, insurance companies hired him. His job was simple. Follow money, find what other people missed. The two men shook hands, ordered coffee, skipped the small talk. Stefan slid a folder across the table. Ryan opened it immediately. "What am I looking at?" "Prenup disclosure schedules." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "That's serious already." Stefan nodded. "Just tell me if something looks strange." Ryan spent nearly 20 minutes reading, occasionally making notes, occasionally asking questions. Nothing dramatic, just careful analysis. Finally, he closed the folder. How much do you know about the Whitaker business structure? Not much. Ryan leaned back. That's probably intentional. Stefan listened. The disclosures aren't necessarily false. But Ryan tapped the papers. They feel incomplete. Stefan remained silent. Ryan continued. Look at it this way. He pulled out a pen. If I owned a company worth $200 million, I wouldn't disclose every lawnmower and office chair, obviously. But I would disclose every entity capable of generating material income. Stefan nodded. That made sense. Ryan flipped through several pages again. These schedules show primary assets. Right. But they leave out supporting structures. What kind? Subsidiaries, holding companies, investment vehicles. Stefan thought about the LLCs he had found. Ryan noticed immediately. You already found something. A few names. Ryan smiled. That's why you called me. Stefan handed over his notes. Ryan read carefully. The smile disappeared, not dramatically, just enough. Interesting. How interesting? Ryan looked back at the documents. Interesting enough that I'd want more records. Stefan waited. Ryan continued. If those entities own property, receive income, or hold assets, somebody should explain why they aren't included. Could it be innocent? Of course, the answer came immediately. Then Ryan added, but people usually disclose things they know can be discovered. That sentence stayed with Stefan. People usually disclose things they know can be discovered. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. By the end, Ryan had prepared a list. Corporate filings, property records, mortgage documents, tax registrations. Nothing illegal, nothing secret, just public information. The kind many people never bothered to examine. Stefan drove home carrying the list. The city lights reflected across Charleston Harbor. A cargo ship moved slowly in the distance. Everything felt strangely calm. Because despite the tension, despite the uncertainty, one thing had become clear. He wasn't imagining the inconsistencies. Someone else saw them too. Maybe there was a harmless explanation. Maybe there wasn't. Either way, facts would decide. Not assumptions, not accusations. Facts. Near midnight, Stefan sat once again at his kitchen table. The same table where his mother used to balance checkbooks years ago. The same table where he had built business plans, reviewed contracts, made decisions. A photograph of Grace West sat nearby. Simple frame, simple smile. She had taught him many things. One lesson stood above the rest. Never argue with people when documents can speak for you. Stefan opened his laptop, opened the county records database, opened Ryan's list, then began searching. One company led to another, one filing connected to another. A network slowly emerged, and around 1:40 a.m., Stefan found something far more troubling than a missing LLC. For the first time since this began, he stopped typing altogether. Then he stared at the screen. Because one property transfer completed just 4 months earlier raised a question that no prenuptial agreement could easily explain. The property transfer involved a parcel of waterfront land outside Charleston. Nothing extraordinary at first glance. 22 acres, commercial zoning, prime development potential, the type of property Whitaker Development acquired regularly. What caught Stefan's attention wasn't the land, it was the timing. 4 months earlier, ownership had been transferred from one Whitaker-controlled entity to another. The recorded sale price was $800,000. Stefan checked the county assessment records. The land had recently been valued at nearly $6 million. He stared at the numbers, then checked them again and again. Mistakes happened. Public databases occasionally contained errors. But $6,800,000 were not numbers someone confused accidentally. The transfer might have been legitimate. There could be tax reasons, corporate restructuring, asset protection strategies, dozens of explanations. Yet the transaction felt strange, especially because neither company appeared anywhere in the prenuptial disclosure schedules. Stefan forwarded the documents to Ryan. The reply arrived less than 15 minutes later. One sentence. Keep digging, nothing more. That told Stefan everything he needed to know. Ryan wasn't the type to overreact. If he thought the transfer deserved attention, it probably did. The following week became unusually busy. 3 major commercial installations, a hospital contract, 2 new client proposals. Normally work helped Stefan clear his mind. This time it didn't, because pieces kept appearing, small pieces, unrelated pieces, yet somehow connected. One LLC led to another. A property connected to a trust connected to a holding company. The structure became increasingly complicated, and complicated structures usually existed for a reason. Late Thursday afternoon, Stefan received a text from Lauren. "Dinner tomorrow, just us." For a moment he considered declining, not because he was angry, because he wasn't sure what remained to discuss. Still, he agreed. The next evening they met at a restaurant overlooking Charleston Harbor, a place they had visited many times before. Years ago it had been one of their favorites. Now it felt different. Not because the restaurant had changed, because they had. Lauren arrived 20 minutes late, something she rarely used to do. Stefan noticed dark circles beneath her eyes. She looked tired, stressed. The waitress took their order. Conversation stayed polite at first. Weather, work, wedding planning, safe topics. Eventually, Lauren put down her glass. "We need to stop this." Stefan already knew what she meant. The prenup, everything. Her voice lowered. "My father feels attacked." Stefan looked out toward the harbor. A tugboat moved slowly across the water, steady, unhurried. He wished the evening felt the same. "I haven't attacked anyone," Lauren sighed. "Do you really think my family is hiding something?" The question lingered. Stefan noticed she hadn't asked whether something might actually be hidden, only whether he believed it. That difference mattered. He chose his words carefully. "I think there are questions. Questions can destroy trust." Stefan almost responded immediately. Instead, he waited. People often revealed more when silence lasted slightly longer than expected. Lauren continued, "You know how this looks, right?" There it was again. Looks, appearances, perception, the same theme appearing over and over. Stefan remembered a much earlier version of Lauren. The Lauren who didn't care about appearances. The Lauren who used to eat fish tacos on a dock while wearing paint-covered jeans. The Lauren who once told him she hated Charleston's social circles. Now she sounded like she belonged to them. Maybe she always had. Maybe he simply hadn't noticed. "I care less about how things look," Stefan said quietly, "and more about whether they're true." Lauren looked away. The conversation never recovered. Dinner ended awkwardly. No argument. No dramatic scene. Just 2 people sitting across from each other while an invisible distance grew wider. As Stefan walked her to her car, she stopped beside the driver's door. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The words surprised him, not because they were harsh, because they sounded exactly like something William Whitaker would say. Lauren kissed his cheek, then drove away. Stefan watched the taillights disappear into traffic. For the first time since they became engaged, he felt genuinely uncertain about their future, not because of money, because of values. The following Sunday provided another answer, though not one he expected. William Whitaker hosted a private luncheon at the Charleston Harbor Country Club. Several business associates attended. Investors, developers, bankers, political donors. Lauren had invited Stefan earlier in the week. Reluctantly, he accepted. The event felt more like a networking function than a family gathering. Men in expensive jackets discussed commercial projects. Women exchanged stories about charity boards and fundraising galas. Every conversation seemed connected to influence. Stefan spent most of the afternoon listening, observing, exactly as he always did. At one point, he stepped outside onto a terrace overlooking the golf course. The air smelled of salt and freshly cut grass. He intended to spend a few quiet minutes alone. Instead, he heard voices around the corner. Jason's voice, recognizable instantly. Stefan stopped. Not intentionally. The conversation simply reached him before he could announce himself. "Still can't believe he hasn't signed." Laughter followed. Another man responded, "Maybe he's holding out for more money." More laughter. Jason sounded amused. "He doesn't even know what he's worth." The group laughed again. Stefan remained motionless, not because the comment offended him, because it intrigued him. What exactly had Jason meant? A second voice joined the conversation. William, calm, confident. "He's a good worker." The compliment sounded almost sincere. Then William added, "But men like Stefan confuse stubbornness with leverage." Several people agreed. Someone changed the subject. The conversation moved elsewhere, yet Stefan stayed where he was, thinking. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. The Whitakers had underestimated him from the beginning. That part wasn't new. The interesting part was something else. Jason's comment. "He doesn't even know what he's worth." Most people would interpret that as an insult. Stefan wasn't so sure, because Jason had sounded oddly confident, almost relieved, as if he believed certain information remained hidden. The thought stayed with Stefan long after he left the country club. That evening he returned home, opened his laptop, reviewed everything again. Property transfers, corporate filings, mortgage records, tax registrations. One pattern became increasingly obvious. Assets seemed to move frequently between Whitaker-controlled entities, far more frequently than normal, not illegal, not necessarily suspicious, just unusual. Near midnight, Ryan finally called. No greeting, no small talk, just business. "I found something." Stefan sat up straighter. "What?" "The waterfront parcel." "What about it?" Ryan paused, long enough to make Stefan pay closer attention. "The company that acquired it 4 months ago." "Yes." Ryan exhaled slowly. "I traced ownership." Stefan waited, and Ryan's answer changed everything. "The company isn't owned by William Whitaker." A beat passed. "Then who owns it?" More silence. Then Ryan gave the name, a name Stefan never expected to hear, and suddenly the entire situation looked very different. The name Ryan gave him was Lauren Whitaker. For several seconds, Stefan said nothing. He sat at his kitchen table staring through the dark window overlooking the water behind his house. The only sound came from waves tapping softly against the dock. "Say that again," Stefan finally said. Ryan repeated it. "The company holding the waterfront parcel is controlled through a trust." Stefan listened carefully. "The primary beneficiary listed in the trust documents is Lauren Whitaker." Silence followed, not shock, something more complicated, because the information didn't fit neatly into anything Stefan thought he knew. Ryan continued, "I don't know whether she knows." That mattered. A lot. Stefan rubbed his forehead. "What else?" "The trust acquired the land 4 months ago, the same time period as the transfer." "Exactly." Stefan leaned back. 1,000 possibilities immediately appeared. Maybe William had gifted the property. Maybe Lauren was being prepared for future ownership. Maybe it was ordinary estate planning. Wealthy families did those things all the time, yet one fact remained. The asset wasn't listed in the disclosure package attached to the prenup. Ryan seemed to be thinking the same thing. Whether this is innocent or intentional, it should have been disclosed. Stefan nodded. "I know." The call lasted another 20 minutes, mostly strategy, mostly questions, very few answers. When it ended, Stefan remained at the table long after midnight. His laptop screen glowed in front of him. Property records, trust filings, corporate registrations, pages and pages of information. But the real issue wasn't the paperwork anymore. It was Lauren. If she knew about the trust, why hadn't she mentioned it? If she didn't know what else was happening around her, neither possibility felt good. The next few days passed quietly, too quietly. Lauren never called. William never called. Even Jason remained silent. Stefan suspected they believed time would solve the problem. People with power often confused silence with victory. Meanwhile, he continued gathering information, not aggressively, not obsessively, just carefully. The way he approached everything. Every evening after work, he spent an hour reviewing records. Every evening he found something else. Additional entities, additional transfers, additional connections. Nothing criminal, nothing sensational, just layers. A surprising number of layers. Enough to make disclosure important, enough to make Section 14 increasingly significant. By Wednesday afternoon, Stefan received an email. The sender surprised nobody. Bradley Haynes. The subject line was short. Request for final review meeting. Stefan opened it. The language was polite, professional. The Whitaker family wished to schedule another discussion regarding the prenuptial agreement. Date, time, location. Friday morning. Haynes Legal Group, downtown Charleston. Stefan read the email twice, then forwarded it to Ryan. 2 minutes later, Ryan responded. They're nervous. Stefan smiled slightly, not because he enjoyed the situation, because Ryan was probably right. Friday arrived with heavy rain. Gray clouds covered the city. Traffic crawled through downtown streets. Stefan arrived 10 minutes early. The law office occupied the top floor of a modern glass building overlooking Marion Square. Everything inside reflected wealth. Marble floors, polished wood, original artwork. The reception area looked more like a luxury hotel than a legal office. A receptionist escorted him to a conference room. William Whitaker was already there, so was Jason. Lauren sat quietly near the window. Bradley occupied the seat closest to a stack of legal documents. Nobody seemed particularly happy. Stefan took his seat. Coffee waited untouched near each chair. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The atmosphere felt completely different from the dinner at the estate. No laughter, no jokes, no confidence. William opened the meeting. We need to resolve this. Straight to business. Stefan appreciated that. Bradley slid another document across the table. A revised prenuptial agreement, thicker than the first version. Interesting. Stefan opened it immediately. William spoke while he read. We've addressed several concerns. Stefan continued turning pages. Bradley added explanations, updated language, clarified provisions, additional protections, more detailed asset classifications. Everything sounded reasonable, until Stefan reached the new restrictions. Then he slowed down, very slowly. Several additions stood out immediately. Future business interests, future investment gains, future acquisitions. The language had become even broader, more protective, more aggressive, not less. Stefan read every page. Nobody interrupted this time. Apparently they had learned that lesson. 25 minutes passed. 30. Finally, Stefan closed the document. He looked directly at Bradley. May I ask a question? The attorney nodded. Of course. Stefan tapped a page near the middle. This section requires me to waive claims against undisclosed future interests. Correct. How can I waive claims against assets I haven't been informed about? The room became very still. Bradley answered carefully. The language is standard. Stefan didn't react. That wasn't my question. Another silence. William shifted in his chair. Jason crossed his arms. Lauren stared at the table. Stefan continued. If complete disclosure is required under Section 14, why are we expanding waiver language before resolving disclosure concerns? Nobody answered immediately. Bradley finally spoke. Because we maintain that disclosure has been sufficient. Maintain, not prove, maintain. Stefan noticed every word. Years of contract negotiations had trained him to do that. The smallest wording changes often revealed the largest concerns. William leaned forward. We've spent enough time on this. His patience was thinning again. Either you trust Lauren or you don't. There it was. The argument they always return to. Trust, emotion, loyalty. Anything except documentation. Stefan remained calm. This isn't about trust. Jason laughed harshly. It obviously is. No. Stefan looked directly at him. It's about verification. Jason rolled his eyes. The reaction told Stefan everything. Jason wasn't interested in facts, only outcomes. The meeting continued for another hour. Questions, answers, half-answers, deflections. Stefan listened carefully. He noticed something unusual. Every time disclosure came up, Bradley became more cautious. Not defensive, cautious, as though he were navigating a legal minefield. That interested Stefan more than anything else. Toward the end of the meeting, William finally lost his composure, not completely, just enough. He placed both hands on the conference table. "Stefan," the room became quiet. "You are making a mistake." Stefan met his gaze. "How?" William's answer came immediately. "Because opportunities don't come twice." Interesting. Not marriage, not Lauren, opportunities. That choice of words stayed with Stefan. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Nothing resolved, nothing signed. Everyone left frustrated. Everyone except Stefan. Because the meeting had confirmed something important. The Whitakers weren't behaving like people trying to protect existing wealth. They were behaving like people trying to control future exposure. And those were very different things. As Stefan entered the elevator, his phone vibrated. A text message. From an unknown number. No greeting, no introduction. Only one sentence. "You should ask why Harbor View Holdings isn't listed anywhere." Stefan stopped reading. The elevator doors closed. Rain streaked across the glass walls outside. His pulse remained steady, but his attention sharpened instantly. Harbor View Holdings, another company, another name, another piece. Someone had just handed him a new trail to follow. The question was, why? And more importantly, who had sent it? Stefan didn't answer the text message immediately. He didn't click any links, didn't call the number, didn't react at all. Years in business had taught him something simple. Information was valuable, but information without verification was dangerous. He stepped out of the elevator and walked through the lobby of the law office. Rain continued falling outside. Cars moved slowly through downtown Charleston. The unknown number remained on his screen. "You should ask why Harbor View Holdings isn't listed anywhere." Nothing more. No explanation, no signature, no threat, just a name. Stefan climbed into his truck and drove back toward his office. The entire trip he thought about two possibilities. The first was obvious. Someone wanted to help him. The second was more likely. Someone wanted him to look in a particular direction. Both possibilities required caution. By late afternoon, he was sitting at his desk, reviewing public filings. Harbor View Holdings appeared quickly, much quicker than expected. The company existed, legally registered, active, and surprisingly large. Stefan spent nearly an hour tracing ownership records. Then he stopped. Not because he had reached a dead end, because he had reached something far more interesting. The company wasn't directly connected to William Whitaker, or Jason, or Lauren, at least not publicly. Instead, ownership flowed through several intermediary entities, layer after layer. The structure reminded Stefan of a set of nested boxes. Open one box, find another. Open that one, find another. Perfectly legal, but difficult to understand at first glance. He forwarded everything to Ryan. The response arrived an hour later. One sentence. "You're going to need a lawyer." Stefan smiled slightly. He had been expecting that answer. The following morning, he scheduled a meeting, not with a corporate attorney, not with a litigation specialist, with Amelia Brooks. Charleston legal circles knew her well. She had built a reputation doing something many lawyers avoided. She didn't care who the client was. She cared what the documents said. People respected that. Some feared it. Stefan met her in a renovated brick building near East Bay Street. The office reflected Amelia perfectly. Clean, organized, efficient. No unnecessary decorations. No attempts to impress. Amelia Brooks entered carrying a legal pad and a cup of coffee. 42 years old. Sharp eyes. Sharper mind. The kind of person who noticed details before most people realized details existed. She sat across from Stefan. "What can I help you with?" Stefan handed over the prenup. Then the disclosure schedules, then the corporate records, then the property transfers. For nearly 30 minutes, Amelia said almost nothing. She simply read, occasionally highlighting sections, occasionally making notes. Stefan remained quiet. Interrupting people like Amelia usually slowed them down. Finally, she set the documents aside. Interesting. The word sounded much less comforting coming from her. Stefan waited. Amelia leaned back. How much do you know about trust structures? Enough to know I don't know enough. That earned a small smile. A fair answer. She picked up one of the filings. The issue isn't necessarily what they've disclosed. Stefan nodded. The issue is what they haven't. Amelia looked pleased. Exactly. For the next hour, she walked him through the documents. Not emotionally, not dramatically, methodically. Several LLCs appeared absent from the disclosures. Certain property transfers seemed unusual. A handful of investment vehicles raised questions. Nothing criminal, nothing scandalous, just incomplete. And incomplete was precisely the problem. Amelia eventually turned to Section 14, the clause that started everything. She read it twice, then a third time, then she placed the agreement on the table. This clause is dangerous. Stefan already suspected that, but hearing it from her mattered. How dangerous? Amelia tapped the page. Most people think this clause protects the wealthier party. She paused. It doesn't. Stefan listened carefully. It protects the honest party. The distinction mattered a lot, Amelia continued. If disclosure is incomplete and the omission is material, the entire agreement can become vulnerable. Stefan nodded slowly. That's what I thought. You're correct. The room became quiet. Rain tapped softly against the office windows. Outside, Charleston moved through another ordinary day. Inside, the shape of the situation was becoming clearer. Amelia opened another folder. Tell me something. What? Have they asked about your assets? Stefan almost laughed. No, not once, no. That answer clearly interested her. Amelia set down her pen. That's unusual. Stefan knew why. Because nobody in the Whitaker family thought he had any. At least not enough to matter. The assumption had followed him from the beginning. The truck, the work clothes, the modest lifestyle. People saw what they expected to see. Amelia folded her hands. What exactly do they think you own? Stefan thought for a moment. A small security company. What else? A house. What else? He shrugged. That's probably it. Amelia stared at him. Then she laughed, the first genuine laugh of the meeting. You really haven't told them? No, not even Lauren. Stefan shook his head. No. Amelia looked almost impressed. Most people couldn't resist talking about money, especially large amounts. Stefan never saw the point. His mother had taught him differently. Money was a tool, not an identity, not a personality, not a substitute for character. Amelia opened a fresh page in her notebook. Let's talk about Harbor Gate. The name brought back memories, years of them. Most people assumed Harbor Gate Security Solutions was Stefan's primary business. It wasn't. It was simply the most visible one. The reality was much different. 15 years earlier, after Grace West passed away, Stefan inherited a life insurance payout. Not enormous, not enough to retire, enough to build something. While friends bought cars and larger houses, Stefan bought assets. One duplex, then another, then a small warehouse, then commercial land, then partnerships, then income-producing properties. One step at a time, year after year, quietly, patiently. Eventually, those assets were transferred into Harbor Gate Holdings Trust. The structure wasn't glamorous, it wasn't flashy, but it worked. Amelia listened carefully, occasionally asking questions, occasionally making notes. When Stefan finished, she sat silently for several moments. Then she calculated numbers. Property values, rental income, commercial holdings, partnership interests, business equity. The total surprised even her. Finally, she looked up. You realize your disclosed net worth exceeds what they've assumed by several multiples. Stefan smiled faintly. I've never corrected them. No kidding. Amelia shook her head. Then her expression became serious again. That creates another problem. What problem? She pointed toward the prenup. They drafted this entire agreement under the assumption that you're the financially weaker party. Stefan understood immediately. The implications were obvious and potentially important. Amelia continued, if they knew your actual position, the negotiation would have looked very different. The room became quiet again. For the first time since the process began, Stefan felt completely calm. Not because he had won anything, not because he had discovered some devastating secret, because facts were finally replacing assumptions. Facts were easier to work with. Facts didn't care about family status or social circles or expensive houses. They simply existed. Amelia closed the file. I think our next step is simple. Stefan waited. We formally request complete financial disclosure, and if they refuse... A small smile appeared. Then we learn why. As Stefan left her office later that afternoon, his phone vibrated again. Another text from the same unknown number. This time the message was shorter. Only 4 words. Ask about Bradley's email. Stefan stopped walking, then slowly looked at the screen again, because whoever was sending these messages seemed to know exactly where the weak points were, and that meant someone much closer to the Whitakers than he had originally imagined. Stefan read the message 3 times. Ask about Bradley's email. Nothing else. No explanation. No context. The sender clearly understood something important. The problem was figuring out what. He slipped the phone into his pocket and continued walking toward his truck. Charleston's late afternoon traffic moved slowly around him. People crossed intersections carrying coffee cups. Tourists wandered along sidewalks. The city looked exactly the same. Yet the situation surrounding the Whitakers felt increasingly complicated. The anonymous messages bothered him less than they should have. Not because he trusted them, because they kept pointing toward things that actually existed. Harbor View Holdings existed. The property transfers existed. The disclosure gaps existed. Whoever was sending the messages wasn't inventing problems. They were highlighting them. That difference mattered. By the time Stefan reached home, Amelia had already emailed him. 3 documents were attached. A draft request for supplemental disclosure, a legal summary regarding Section 14, and a short note. We keep this simple. Let them answer questions in writing. Stefan appreciated that approach. Simple questions often produced revealing answers, especially when lawyers became involved. The next morning, Amelia submitted the request. Professional, direct, no accusations, no threats, no emotional language. The letter asked for clarification regarding several entities omitted from the disclosure package, including Harbor View Holdings, including the waterfront parcel, including multiple LLCs connected to Whitaker business interests. Nothing more. Now they waited. 3 days later, the response arrived. Not from William, not from Jason, from Bradley Haynes. Amelia forwarded it immediately. Stefan opened the email while sitting inside his office. The subject line read, Supplemental Response. He began reading. The language sounded confident, almost overly confident. Bradley maintained that the Whitaker family had already provided complete disclosure. He described the omitted entities as non-material, administrative, inactive, insignificant. Stefan read the email twice, then a 3rd time. Something felt wrong, not because of what Bradley wrote, because of what he didn't write. The response avoided specifics, no explanations, no valuations, no supporting documents, just conclusions. Amelia called less than 20 minutes later. Did you read it? 3 times. What do you think? Stefan stared at the screen. It feels defensive. A brief pause followed. Then Amelia laughed. Good. That answer surprised him. Good. Very good. Stefan listened. Amelia's voice became more focused. The more confident people become, the more mistakes they make. She paused. This email contains one. Now she had his attention. What mistake? Bradley just represented in writing that disclosure is complete. Stefan understood immediately. The significance settled into place. Not a conversation, not an opinion, not an assumption. A written statement, a documented position. The difference was enormous. Amelia continued, "If we later establish material omissions, this email becomes important. Very important." Stefan saved multiple copies, printed one, stored another, then moved on with his day. The process remained slow, methodical, exactly how he preferred it. Meanwhile, the Whitakers appeared increasingly impatient. Lauren called twice that week. Stefan answered both times. Neither conversation went well. The first lasted 7 minutes. The second lasted 4. Each followed the same pattern. Lauren asked when the prenup issue would finally end. Stefan asked questions about disclosure. Lauren redirected the conversation toward trust. Stefan redirected it toward documentation. Neither convinced the other. After the second call ended, Stefan sat quietly for several minutes. The relationship felt different now. Not broken, not yet, but altered. The woman he loved seemed increasingly focused on protecting a narrative, not understanding facts. That realization hurt more than he expected, because Stefan had never cared about Whitaker money, never cared about social status, never cared about country clubs. He cared about Lauren, at least he thought he had. Now he wasn't entirely sure who Lauren actually was. The following Saturday brought another development. The Whitakers hosted an engagement celebration at a luxury waterfront hotel. Nearly 200 guests attended. Business partners, investors, family friends, local politicians, bank executives. The guest list looked more like a corporate networking event than a celebration. Stefan almost declined, then decided to go. Avoiding situations rarely solved them. The ballroom overlooked Charleston Harbor. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished floors. Servers moved through the crowd carrying champagne. Everything looked expensive. Everything felt carefully designed. Stefan arrived alone. Lauren was already there greeting guests. William stood near a group of investors. Jason occupied the center of another conversation. Nobody appeared particularly surprised to see him. Several people did appear surprised that he actually came. The evening progressed predictably. Small talk, introductions, polite smiles, nothing unusual. Then the speeches began. William spoke first, a practiced speaker, confident, charming. The audience responded exactly as expected. Applause, laughter, admiration. Then Jason took the microphone. That turned out to be a mistake. Jason enjoyed attention too much. People like that often crossed lines without noticing or caring. He began telling stories, childhood stories, family stories, business stories. Then he shifted toward wedding stories. Stefan recognized the direction immediately. Several guests laughed before the punchline even arrived. Jason enjoyed that. "Some of you may have heard about our little prenup disagreement." More laughter. Stefan remained still. Across the room, Lauren's smile looked strained. Jason continued, apparently unable to help himself. "Stefan's the only guy I've ever met who looked at a fortune and said, 'Let me think about it.'" The crowd laughed again, a few louder than others. Stefan didn't react, didn't move, didn't even change expression, because anger would have given Jason exactly what he wanted, attention. Instead, Stefan watched and listened. People revealed themselves when they believed there were no consequences. William didn't stop Jason. Patricia didn't stop him. Lauren didn't stop him either. That bothered Stefan most. Not the joke, not the laughter, the silence. Then his phone vibrated. One text message. From Amelia. Short. Direct. They replied again. Stefan stepped away from the crowd and opened the message. An email attachment appeared beneath it. Bradley's office had sent supplemental information, apparently in response to follow-up questions. Stefan opened the document, read the first page, then the second, then the third. The ballroom noise seemed to disappear around him, because Bradley had finally provided details. and those details directly contradicted information already contained in public records. Stefan read the numbers again. They didn't match. Not even close. For the first time since this process began, the discrepancy wasn't subtle. It wasn't a technicality. It wasn't an interpretation. It was measurable, documented, provable, and Bradley had just delivered it in writing. Across the ballroom, laughter continued around Jason. The Whitakers believed they were still controlling the story. Stefan looked back down at the email, then at the attached schedules, then at the public filings stored on his phone. A quiet realization settled over him. Someone on their side had just made a very expensive mistake, and they didn't know it yet. Stefan left the ballroom and stepped onto an outdoor terrace overlooking Charleston Harbor. The night air felt cooler than expected. Behind him, music continued. Laughter echoed through the glass doors. Champagne glasses clinked. The engagement celebration carried on as if nothing had changed. But something had. Stefan leaned against the railing and opened the attachment again. The numbers remained exactly where they had been 30 seconds earlier, exactly where they had been 5 minutes earlier, exactly where they would remain tomorrow. Facts had a stubborn quality. They didn't change simply because people preferred different outcomes. The supplemental disclosure listed Harbor View Holdings as possessing minimal activity, minimal assets, minimal value. Yet public records showed recent property acquisitions worth millions, not estimates, not rumors, recorded transactions, filed documents, official records. The discrepancy wasn't subtle anymore, and Bradley Haynes had now confirmed his position in writing. Stefan forwarded everything to Amelia. The reply came almost immediately. "Call me." He did. Amelia answered before the first ring completed. "Tell me you've read it." "I have." A brief silence. Then Amelia spoke. "The numbers don't match." "No. They aren't even close." "No." Another pause. Stefan could almost hear her organizing thoughts. When Amelia became quiet, it usually meant she was building an argument or spotting an opportunity. Finally, she spoke again. "I need copies of everything. You'll have them tonight." "Good." Her voice sharpened full. "Because somebody just moved this conversation into a very different category." Stefan understood exactly what she meant. Up until now, there had been questions, concerns, possibilities. Now there were inconsistencies documented across multiple records, still not proof of wrongdoing, but enough to demand explanations. Amelia ended the call with a simple instruction: "Do nothing tonight." Stefan smiled slightly. "I wasn't planning to." "Good." The line disconnected. For several minutes, Stefan remained outside. The harbor stretched across the darkness. Lights from boats moved slowly in the distance. The city looked peaceful, far more peaceful than the ballroom behind him. Eventually, he returned inside. Nobody seemed to notice he had been gone. Jason remained the center of attention. William stood among investors. Patricia floated through conversations. Lauren moved between guests with a practiced smile. Everything appeared normal. Yet Stefan suddenly realized how much effort went into maintaining that appearance. Appearances required constant maintenance. Facts did not. An hour later, the celebration ended. Guests departed. Valets retrieved luxury vehicles. The ballroom slowly emptied. Lauren finally approached him near the entrance. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt different than before, heavier, more uncertain. "You disappeared." Her voice sounded tired. "I took a call." Lauren nodded. Neither asked questions. Neither volunteered answers. The distance between them seemed impossible to ignore now. Then Lauren looked toward the parking area. Jason shouldn't have said those things. Stefan studied her expression. This was the first criticism of Jason he had heard all evening, maybe the first in weeks. "It doesn't matter." "It does." Her answer came quickly, too quickly, as though she had been rehearsing it. Stefan wasn't sure whether she believed it. That uncertainty bothered him, because months earlier he would have known. Months earlier reading Lauren had been easy. Now it wasn't. "Good night, Lauren." The words ended the conversation. Nothing dramatic, nothing cruel, just final, for tonight at least. Stefan drove home alone. The roads were nearly empty. Rain had finally stopped. Streetlights reflected across wet pavement. His phone remained silent. No texts, no calls, no anonymous messages, just quiet. The kind of quiet that usually appeared before something changed. The next morning, Amelia requested an emergency meeting, not because she was excited, because she was careful, very careful. Stefan arrived at her office shortly after 9. Several folders already covered the conference table. Highlighted documents, printed emails, property records, corporate filings, disclosure schedules. Amelia pointed toward a chair. Sit. Not a suggestion, a command. Stefan sat. For nearly 40 minutes, Amelia walked him through every inconsistency, line by line, document by document. Some were minor, others weren't. 3 omitted entities, 2 questionable valuations, multiple property transfers, the Harbor View issue, the Lauren Trust. Individually, each discrepancy could potentially be explained. Together, they formed a pattern. That was the problem. Patterns attracted attention, especially legal attention. Amelia eventually slid a printed email across the table. Bradley's email, the original one, the one claiming complete disclosure. Stefan had practically memorized it by now. What about it? Amelia tapped a paragraph. This. He read it again, then a third time, and suddenly understood. The wording wasn't merely confident, it was absolute. Complete disclosure had been made. Not believed, not estimated, made. A factual assertion, a representation, a statement, a documented position. The distinction mattered enormously. Amelia leaned back. If discovery ever happens, this email becomes significant. Stefan nodded slowly. Because it's in writing. Exactly. The room became quiet. Both understood the implications. Neither needed to say them aloud. Eventually, Amelia folded her hands. I think we request one final meeting. Stefan looked up. With everyone present. Everyone. Why? A small smile appeared. Because I want to see their reactions. That answer surprised him. Amelia noticed. People prepare for questions. She tapped the files. They rarely prepare for documents. The meeting ended shortly afterward. As Stefan walked back toward his truck, another thought occupied his mind. The anonymous texts. Whoever was sending them clearly knew things, not guesses, things. Specific weaknesses, specific records, specific documents. The sender had pointed him toward Harbor View. The sender had pointed him toward Bradley's email. Both proved useful. Neither proved random, which meant the sender probably had access. Access to what remained unclear, but access nonetheless. 3 days later, another clue appeared, completely by accident. Stefan was reviewing one of Bradley's supplemental responses when he noticed something odd, a metadata stamp attached to the document. Most people would never notice. Most people wouldn't know where to look. Years of reviewing security audits had taught Stefan differently. Every file left traces, creation times, revision histories, user information, tiny digital fingerprints. This document carried one. The revision history revealed another user had accessed the file before it was sent. Not William, not Jason, not Lauren, someone else. The initials appeared clearly, M.R. Stefan stared at the screen, then checked again. Same result. M.R. The initials meant nothing at first. Then a memory surfaced, one brief introduction months earlier at a Whitaker office gathering. A woman from accounting, quiet, observant, rarely spoke. Melissa Rhodes. Stefan sat back slowly. Could be coincidence, could be nothing, but something told him it wasn't. Because for the first time since this began, the anonymous messages had a possible source. And if Melissa Rhodes was involved, then someone inside the Whitaker organization might already be worried enough to start leaving breadcrumbs. The question was, why? The answer, Stefan suspected, was hidden somewhere inside the documents they were still trying so hard to avoid discussing. The final meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, 10 a.m., Haynes Legal Group, Conference Room A. The invitation arrived from Bradley Haynes himself. Professional, brief, neutral, yet even through the email, Stefan sensed tension. People became concise when they were uncomfortable, especially attorneys. The days leading up to the meeting passed quietly, too quietly. No calls from William, no texts from Jason. Only one short message from Lauren. "Are we really doing this?" Stefan stared at the screen for several moments, then locked the phone without responding, not because he wanted to hurt her, because he no longer knew how to answer. The question itself revealed the problem. Lauren still believed this was about conflict, about pride, about winning. She still didn't understand that Stefan wasn't pursuing a fight. He was pursuing clarity. The difference mattered. Unfortunately, fewer and fewer people seemed able to see it. Monday evening, Stefan sat with Amelia in her office, reviewing their materials. The stack wasn't enormous. That surprised him. After weeks of investigation, he expected something dramatic. Boxes, binders, hundreds of pages. Instead, Amelia had organized everything into a thin black folder, perhaps an inch thick. Nothing more. Stefan looked at it. "That's it." Amelia smiled. "That's enough." She tapped the folder. "People think cases are won with mountains of documents. They aren't. Usually they're won with the right documents." Stefan nodded. That sounded exactly right. The folder contained only what mattered: the original prenup, the disclosure schedules, property records, the Harbor View filings, Bradley's emails. Nothing unnecessary, nothing emotional, nothing speculative. Facts, only facts. Before leaving, Stefan asked a question that had been sitting in the back of his mind for days. "Do you think Bradley knows?" Amelia considered it, long enough to take the question seriously. Then she answered, "I think Bradley knows less than people assume." That surprised him. Why? Because if he knew everything, he wouldn't have put certain statements in writing. The answer stayed with Stefan all night, because it introduced a possibility he hadn't fully considered. What if Bradley wasn't protecting the Whitakers? What if he was protecting the information he had been given? There was a difference, a very important difference. Tuesday morning arrived clear and bright. Charleston seemed unusually calm. The rain had finally disappeared. Sunlight reflected from office windows downtown. Traffic moved steadily. People hurried toward work carrying coffee cups. Normal. Everything looked normal. Stefan parked near Marion Square and entered the law office at 9:47 a.m. early, exactly how he preferred it. Amelia arrived 5 minutes later. Neither spoke much while waiting. There wasn't much left to discuss. The documents would do the talking. At exactly 10 o'clock, the conference room doors opened. William entered first, confident as always, but not quite as confident as before. Stefan noticed immediately. Small things, tighter jaw, less eye contact, faster movements. Stress always left fingerprints. Jason followed, then Lauren, then Patricia, finally Bradley. Everyone took their seats. The atmosphere felt different from every previous meeting. Nobody smiled, nobody joked, nobody attempted small talk. Even Jason remained quiet. Bradley cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming." Formal, careful, attorney language. Stefan sat silently. Amelia did the same. Bradley continued, "We'd like to resolve this matter and move forward." Move forward. Another phrase that sounded reasonable. Another phrase designed to skip over uncomfortable details. Amelia leaned forward slightly. "So would we." Bradley nodded, then slid a document across the table, an updated disclosure summary. Stefan barely glanced at it, because Amelia already had. And because today's meeting wasn't really about new documents, it was about old ones. William folded his hands. "What exactly is it you think we're hiding?" The question arrived with obvious frustration. Stefan noticed something interesting. For weeks, nobody had asked that question directly. Now William was asking it himself. That meant pressure was building. Amelia answered, "We're not interested in assumptions." She opened the black folder. "We're interested in explanations." Then she removed the first document, a property transfer, placed it on the table. Silence. The second document followed. Harbor View Holdings. Silence. The third, trust records. Silence. The fourth, corporate filings. Silence. Nobody interrupted. Nobody laughed. Nobody rolled their eyes. The room had moved beyond that stage. William looked at the documents, then at Bradley, then back at the documents. Jason shifted uncomfortably. Patricia stared at the table. Lauren appeared increasingly pale. Amelia spoke calmly, almost casually. As we've noted previously, several entities appear absent from disclosure schedules. Bradley adjusted his glasses. They were determined to be non-material. Amelia nodded, then removed another document, Bradley's email, the one stating complete disclosure. She placed it directly beside the others, a small movement. Yet Stefan felt the atmosphere change immediately because everyone recognized it. Bradley especially. The attorney's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Amelia continued, "This email confirms that complete disclosure was made." Bradley said nothing. William looked confused. Jason looked annoyed. Stefan watched carefully, observing reactions, not words, reactions. Years in security work had taught him something. People prepared statements, they rarely prepared instincts. Amelia turned another page. Public records indicate otherwise. Silence. A long one. Eventually, William leaned forward. "Those records don't tell the whole story." For the first time all morning, Stefan felt genuine interest, because that wasn't a denial, not even close. It was an explanation, or the beginning of one. Amelia remained calm. "Then we're happy to hear the whole story." Nobody spoke. The pause stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then something unexpected happened. Bradley looked toward William, not the other way around, toward William, as if waiting, as if seeking permission. Stefan noticed. So did Amelia. The moment lasted less than 2 seconds, but it revealed a great deal. William finally exhaled, slowly, then leaned back in his chair. The confidence he normally carried seemed diminished. Not gone, just reduced. Some restructuring occurred. There it was, the first admission, small, carefully phrased, but real. Jason immediately jumped in. It was completely legal. Nobody had suggested otherwise. The response sounded defensive, which made it useful. Amelia nodded. "Legal isn't the issue." Jason frowned. "Then what is?" Amelia tapped Section 14 just once, the same way Stefan had done weeks earlier. "Disclosure." The room became silent again, because everyone knew that was true. Every person present, even Jason, especially Bradley. Stefan looked toward Lauren. For a brief moment their eyes met, and what he saw there surprised him. Not anger, not embarrassment, uncertainty, genuine uncertainty, as if she were hearing certain details for the first time. The realization settled heavily inside him. Maybe Lauren knew less than he thought, maybe much less. Then Bradley suddenly spoke. His voice sounded different, more cautious than ever before. "I believe we're reaching a point where additional documentation may be necessary." The statement landed heavily, because it wasn't directed at Stefan or Amelia. It was directed at William. Stefan saw the reaction immediately. William's expression hardened. Jason looked stunned. Patricia looked worried. And for the first time since this entire process began, Bradley Haynes appeared less like the Whitaker's defender and more like a lawyer recognizing a growing problem. Amelia slowly closed her folder. The movement was deliberate, measured. Then she delivered a sentence so simple that nobody interrupted it. "In that case, we'll need everything." The room fell completely silent, and judging by the look that crossed William Whitaker's face, he finally understood exactly where this was heading. Nobody moved. The silence inside the conference room felt heavier than anything that had been said. Outside, the floor-to-ceiling windows, Charleston continued its normal Tuesday morning. Cars crossed intersections. People walked sidewalks. Construction crews worked a few blocks away. Inside the room, however, something had shifted. The conversation was no longer about a prenuptial agreement. Everyone knew it, especially William Whitaker, especially Bradley Haynes. Amelia remained calm, patient. She wasn't pushing. She didn't need to. The documents were already on the table, literally. And unlike opinions, documents rarely became nervous. William finally broke the silence. "What exactly are you suggesting?" The question sounded controlled, but Stefan noticed the strain underneath. William was no longer speaking like a man directing a conversation. He was speaking like a man responding to one. Amelia folded her hands. "I'm suggesting nothing." She nodded toward the stack of papers. "The records speak for themselves." William's jaw tightened. Jason leaned forward. "That's ridiculous." His voice carried more emotion than confidence. "These are normal business structures." Amelia looked at him. "Perhaps. Then what's the problem?" "The omission. Simple, direct, undeniable." Jason opened his mouth, then stopped. Because there wasn't an easy answer, Stefan sat quietly, observing, listening, exactly as he had from the beginning. People often assumed silence meant weakness. In reality, silence frequently revealed more than speaking. And at that moment, everyone in the room seemed eager to reveal something. William turned toward Bradley. "Explain this." The attorney adjusted his glasses, not for the first time that morning. Stefan had noticed the habit appearing more frequently, a subtle tell, stress. Certain entities were classified as non-material. The answer sounded weaker now, less certain, because the supporting documents were sitting directly beside it. Amelia opened another folder, not the black one, a smaller one. Stefan recognized it immediately. The property records, the corporate filings, the records Ryan had helped uncover. One by one, Amelia placed them on the table. Not dramatically, methodically. A warehouse property, an investment vehicle, an LLC connected to commercial holdings. Another trust, another filing, each document accompanied by dates, values, ownership structures. No accusations, no speeches, just facts. Stefan watched Bradley's expression carefully. The attorney was reading ahead now, reviewing pages before Amelia reached them. That alone told Stefan something important. Bradley hadn't seen all of this before, or at least not all at once. Interesting. Very interesting. William noticed it too. "Bradley," the attorney looked up. "Did you review all of these?" A dangerous question, because everyone knew what it really meant. "Did you know?" Bradley answered carefully. "I reviewed the information provided to me." William stared at him. The answer clearly wasn't what he wanted. Jason jumped in immediately. "So now we're blaming lawyers." No one responded, not even William, because the room had become too careful for that. Eventually, Amelia slid one final document across the table, a printed copy of Bradley's own email, the one declaring complete disclosure. The paper stopped directly in front of him. Nobody spoke. Bradley looked down, read it, then read it again. The room waited. Finally, he exhaled slowly, a small sound, yet somehow louder than anything else that morning. Stefan recognized the moment. It was the sound of a professional realizing his position had become uncomfortable. Not impossible, just uncomfortable. William leaned forward. "What are you saying?" Bradley looked at him. For the first time, the attorney seemed less interested in protecting feelings and more interested in protecting facts. "I'm saying we need additional documentation." Jason threw his hands into the air. "Jesus Christ!" His frustration echoed across the room. "This is insane." Stefan finally spoke, the first words he had said in nearly 20 minutes. "Then providing the documents should be easy." The room turned toward him, every face, every pair of eyes. Stefan didn't raise his voice, didn't sound angry, didn't sound triumphant, just calm, because calm people were harder to argue with. Jason glared at him. "You think you've caught us in something?" "No." Then what do you think? Stefan looked directly at him. I think paperwork should match reality. Silence. Again. The answer was impossible to attack without sounding unreasonable. Jason realized that. His frustration became visible. Lauren remained quiet. Too quiet. Stefan occasionally glanced toward her, trying to understand what she was thinking, not because he expected answers, because he remembered the woman she used to be, the woman who valued honesty above appearances, the woman who once told him that truth mattered more than comfort. That version of Lauren felt very far away now. Yet as the meeting continued, Stefan noticed something changing. She wasn't defending her father. She wasn't defending Jason. She wasn't defending the disclosures. She was simply listening and occasionally looking surprised. That mattered, more than she probably realized. Amelia opened another page. Let's discuss Harbor View Holdings. The reaction was immediate, not dramatic, not obvious, but immediate. William shifted slightly. Jason looked toward his father. Bradley became very still. Stefan noticed every movement. Harbor View clearly mattered. Amelia continued. The company controls multiple assets. Nobody disagreed. It appears connected to other disclosed entities. Again, nobody disagreed, yet it wasn't disclosed. This time nobody answered because they couldn't. The records existed, the omission existed, the facts existed. William finally spoke. It wasn't producing meaningful revenue. Amelia nodded. Then disclosure would have been simple. Another silence, another uncomfortable one. Stefan felt something becoming increasingly clear. The Whitakers had expected resistance. They had prepared for arguments. They had prepared for emotion. They had not prepared for documentation. That was the difference. The entire process had been built on assumptions. They assumed Stefan lacked resources. They assumed he lacked knowledge. They assumed he would sign. And because of those assumptions, they became careless, not malicious. Careless. Sometimes carelessness created bigger problems than bad intentions. The meeting continued for nearly another hour. Questions, clarifications, requests, responses. By the end, nobody looked particularly pleased, especially William, especially Jason. Eventually, Amelia closed her folder. We'll need complete supplemental records. William rubbed his temples. How much? Amelia's answer came instantly. Everything connected to omitted entities. Jason laughed bitterly. Everything. Everything. The room fell silent again. Then something unexpected happened. Lauren spoke, the first time in almost an hour. Can we see those records too? Every head turned toward her. William looked genuinely surprised. Patricia looked concerned. Jason looked irritated. Stefan simply watched. Lauren didn't look at anyone. Her eyes remained on the table, yet her voice sounded steady. If we're discussing disclosure, I want to see everything too. Interesting. Very interesting. For the first time in weeks, Stefan saw a glimpse of the person he remembered. Someone interested in answers, not appearances. William's response came slowly. We'll discuss that later. Lauren looked up. No. The word wasn't loud, yet it landed heavily. We should discuss it now. The room became still. Stefan recognized what had just happened. A fracture, small but real. For the first time, someone inside the Whitaker family had publicly requested the same thing he had been requesting. Information. Nothing more, nothing less. The meeting ended shortly afterward, not because anyone wanted it to, because nobody knew how to continue. As chairs moved and folders closed, Bradley approached Amelia quietly. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Stefan couldn't hear the words, but he saw Amelia's expression afterward. Interested, focused, concerned, all at once. When they finally entered the elevator together, Stefan looked at her. What was that about? Amelia waited until the doors closed. Then she answered, Bradley just told me something. Stefan felt his attention sharpen immediately. What? Amelia looked straight ahead. According to him, the disclosure package wasn't finalized by his office. A pause. Then she added, it was revised after it left his office. Stefan stared at her, because if that was true, everything had just become much more complicated. The elevator descended slowly. Neither Stefan nor Amelia spoke for several floors. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. Both were processing the same thing. Bradley Haynes had just created distance between himself and the disclosure package. Not openly, not dramatically, but enough. The distinction mattered. A lot. When the elevator reached the lobby, Amelia finally spoke. If he's telling the truth, then somebody modified the disclosure package after legal review. Stefan nodded. And if he's lying, then he's protecting himself. Both possibilities were significant. They stepped outside into the warm Charleston afternoon. Traffic moved steadily past Marion Square. Nothing about the city suggested that several $1 million worth of questions were quietly unfolding a few stories above. Amelia looked toward Stefan. Either way, we've reached the same destination. What destination? She gave him a small smile. The point where people stopped talking about assumptions. The next 72 hours moved quickly. Requests became demands. Documents began appearing, not all at once, not voluntarily, but gradually. Additional schedules, supplemental records, property summaries, corporate filings. The flow of information seemed reluctant, like someone opening a door 1 inch at a time. Stefan spent every evening reviewing the material, line by line, date by date, entity by entity. And with every new document, one fact became harder to ignore. The omissions weren't random. They followed a pattern. Certain assets appeared, others disappeared. Certain entities received detailed explanations, others received almost none. By Thursday night, Amelia had assembled a timeline. The entire thing fit across a conference table. Stefan stared at it, colored tabs, highlighted dates, transfer records, trust formations, disclosure revisions. It looked less like a legal review and more like an investigation. Amelia pointed to a date 6 months earlier. Here, Stefan leaned forward, the formation date of a holding company. Nothing unusual. Then she pointed to another date, 4 months earlier, the waterfront property transfer. Then another, the revision date of the disclosure schedules. Then another, the execution date of the prenup draft. Everything lined up, too neatly, too conveniently. Amelia folded her arms. I think we're done asking questions. Stefan looked at her. What does that mean? It means we're ready for the final meeting. The final meeting. The words lingered because both of them understood what came next. Not litigation, not a courtroom, something simpler, the truth. Friday morning, Amelia requested one final conference. Mandatory attendance. William, Jason, Lauren, Patricia, Bradley, everyone. The response arrived before lunch. They agreed. Monday morning, 10 o'clock. Same conference room. Stefan spent the weekend working, not because he needed the distraction, because work helped him think. At a warehouse installation in North Charleston, he climbed ladders, checked cameras, tested access systems, normal tasks, honest tasks, the kind that produced measurable results. Input, output, no politics, no manipulation, no social games. By Sunday evening, his decision regarding Lauren had quietly become clear. The realization wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment, no explosion, no final betrayal, just accumulation, weeks of observations, weeks of choices, weeks of silence. Stefan sat on the dock behind his house as the sun disappeared over the water. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider a future without Lauren. The thought hurt more than he expected, not because he feared being alone, because he remembered who she used to be, or who he thought she was. Those memories still mattered. Unfortunately, memories weren't reality. Reality was what people did when pressure arrived, and pressure had arrived. Monday morning came clear and bright. The conference room felt smaller this time, perhaps because nobody bothered with formalities anymore. Everyone arrived early. Everyone looked tired, William appeared older. Jason looked irritated. Patricia looked worried. Lauren looked exhausted. Bradley looked like a man who hadn't slept particularly well. Amelia organized her documents. Stefan sat quietly, waiting, observing. At exactly 10 o'clock, Amelia opened a folder, not a large folder, not a dramatic one, just enough. Then she began. No one here disputes the existence of omitted entities. Nobody objected. Good start. No one disputes the existence of omitted transfers. Again, silence. Another good start. No one disputes that multiple revisions occurred. Still nothing. William shifted in his chair. Jason stared at the table. Bradley remained expressionless. Amelia turned a page, then another, then finally placed section 14 in the center of the table. The clause that started everything. The clause everyone had ignored. The clause nobody was laughing about anymore. She tapped the page lightly. This clause is remarkably clear. Bradley nodded slowly. The attorney knew exactly where this was going. Amelia continued. Intentional concealment of material assets may invalidate protections granted under this agreement. Silence. Stefan watched William carefully. For the first time, the businessman looked genuinely uncomfortable, not angry, not offended. Uncomfortable. The difference mattered. Jason finally spoke. So what? The response sounded defensive, almost desperate. Amelia looked directly at him. So the agreement doesn't protect the party engaging in concealment. The words settled heavily over the room. Nobody interrupted. Nobody laughed. Nobody challenged the language. Because the language belonged to the contract itself, not to Amelia, not to Stefan, to the document. William leaned back slowly. His confidence seemed to leave him inch by inch. Then Bradley did something unexpected. The attorney removed his glasses, set them on the table, and spoke with unusual directness. I believe continuing this agreement would create substantial risk. The room froze, even Jason, especially Jason, because the statement wasn't coming from Stefan's side, it was coming from theirs. William stared at him. What are you saying? Bradley met his gaze. I'm saying the agreement should not proceed. No one moved. No one spoke. The sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread instantly. Patricia looked shocked. Jason looked furious. Lauren looked confused. Stefan simply listened. Bradley continued. The disclosure issues create unnecessary exposure. Exposure, interesting word, very legal, very careful, yet impossible to misunderstand. Amelia remained silent. She didn't need to add anything. The attorney had just said it himself. The prenup had become a liability, not protection, liability, exactly because of the clause they originally believed protected them. Jason stood suddenly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is unbelievable. Nobody responded, because anger wasn't an argument, not anymore. William remained seated, staring at the documents, at the clause, at the consequences. Eventually he spoke, quietly, more quietly than Stefan had ever heard. This wasn't supposed to happen. The words escaped before he could stop them. A small mistake, yet revealing. Stefan noticed. So did Amelia. So did Bradley. Lauren looked toward her father, then toward the documents, then toward Stefan, and for the first time something seemed to connect, a realization, a painful one. She wasn't looking at a man refusing a prenup anymore. She was looking at a man who had spent months asking reasonable questions, questions nobody wanted answered. Slowly, Lauren removed her engagement ring. The movement surprised everyone, including Stefan. She stared at it for several seconds, then placed it on the conference table. The sound was almost inaudible, yet somehow louder than everything else that morning. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke, because everyone understood what the gesture meant, not legally, personally. The room fell silent once more, and as Stefan looked at the ring resting beside Section 14, he realized the clause hadn't merely changed the prenup. It had exposed the foundation beneath the entire relationship. And that foundation no longer looked stable enough to build a marriage on. Nobody reached for the ring. It remained on the conference table beside the prenuptial agreement, a small circle of platinum, a simple object. Yet it seemed to draw everyone's attention. William stared at it. Patricia stared at it. Jason looked away from it. Lauren never touched it again. Stefan remained seated, calm, quiet, the same way he had been from the beginning, but inside something had settled. Not anger, not satisfaction, finality. The realization came with surprising clarity. The relationship had not collapsed because of legal documents. It had collapsed because the documents revealed things that had already existed. Weeks earlier, Stefan might have fought to save the engagement. Months earlier, he certainly would have. Now he wasn't sure there was anything left to save. The silence finally broke when Jason stood up. "This is insane." His voice echoed sharply across the conference room. "No," Bradley answered before anyone else could. The response surprised everyone, including Jason. The attorney slowly put his glasses back on, then organized several pages in front of him. "This is the predictable result of incomplete disclosure." Jason looked stunned. For weeks, he had assumed Bradley stood firmly on the Whitaker side. Now the attorney sounded increasingly independent, increasingly concerned with protecting himself, and increasingly unwilling to defend things he couldn't support. William leaned forward. "Bradley." The single word carried warning. Bradley met his gaze, but he didn't retreat. "William, I'm trying to keep this from becoming worse." The room became very quiet, because everyone understood what he meant. Worse, a simple word, a dangerous word. Stefan watched carefully. For the first time since the process began, William looked uncertain, not because he lacked power, not because he lacked resources, because the situation had moved into territory he couldn't control through confidence alone. Facts were stubborn, documents were stubborn, and those things didn't care how important someone was. Eventually, Amelia closed her folder. The sound broke the tension. "This discussion is finished." Nobody objected, not even Jason. The meeting had reached its natural conclusion. There was nothing left to argue. The agreement was effectively dead. The disclosures would continue creating questions, and the relationship stood on increasingly fragile ground. One by one, people began standing. Patricia left first, then Jason, then William. Only Lauren remained seated. Stefan noticed immediately. She wasn't looking at the ring anymore. She was looking at him. The room gradually emptied. Bradley left. Amelia gathered her files, then she quietly looked toward Stefan. "I'll wait outside." He nodded. Within moments, only he and Lauren remained. For several seconds, neither spoke. The conference room suddenly felt much larger, much quieter. Lauren finally broke the silence. "I didn't know." Stefan believed her. The realization surprised him, yet it felt true, not because of what she said, because of how she said it. There was no performance, no strategy, no careful phrasing, just exhaustion. "I know." Lauren looked down. A small laugh escaped her, not amusement, disappointment, mostly directed at herself. "You knew before I did." Stefan didn't answer, because it was true, and because saying it out loud would have sounded cruel. Lauren rubbed her eyes. "I kept thinking this was about money." Stefan listened. "I thought you were making a point." Another pause. Then she looked directly at him. "You weren't, were you?" "No." The answer came immediately. Lauren nodded slowly, as if confirming something she already knew. Stefan remembered the woman he had met 3 years earlier, the woman who volunteered at community events, the woman who loved old bookstores, the woman who once spent an entire weekend helping him install security cameras at a non-profit youth center. That version of Lauren had existed. He knew it. The problem was that another version existed too. The version who remained silent while her family mocked him. The version who cared more about appearances than answers. The version who watched everything happen and rarely intervened. Both versions were real, and that was the hardest part. People weren't one thing, they were many things. Lauren stared at the engagement ring. I should have said something. Stefan didn't disagree. Several moments passed. Then she asked the question he had been expecting. Is this over? The words hung between them, heavy, unavoidable. Stefan looked through the conference room window. Downtown Charleston stretched beneath a bright blue sky. Life continued. People moved, cars passed, construction cranes stood against the horizon. Everything looked ordinary, yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. When he finally answered, his voice remained calm. I think it ended before today. Lauren closed her eyes. The truth hurt. Stefan could see it, but pain didn't make it false. Neither spoke again for nearly a minute. Then Lauren stood, slowly, carefully, as though she suddenly felt older, more tired. Before leaving, she looked at him one final time. I'm sorry. The apology sounded genuine, which somehow made it sadder. Stefan nodded. Then she walked away. No dramatic exit, no tears, no shouting, just footsteps fading down a hallway, and then she was gone. The next several weeks passed quietly. The wedding was canceled. News traveled quickly through Charleston social circles. People speculated, assumed, gossiped. Stefan ignored most of it. He returned to work, the same way he always had. Clients still needed security systems. Employees still needed leadership. Projects still needed attention. Life kept moving. That simplicity helped. Meanwhile, problems inside Whitaker Development became increasingly difficult to ignore. Not catastrophic problems, not scandals, just pressure, questions, requests, additional documentation, outside accountants, bank reviews, the kinds of things that appeared whenever complicated records attracted attention. Stefan stayed out of it, deliberately. He wasn't interested in revenge. He wasn't interested in humiliation. The facts would go wherever they went without his help. One afternoon, nearly a month after the final meeting, Amelia called. Her tone sounded lighter than usual. Good news. Stefan smiled. You don't usually start conversations that way. True. What happened? Amelia paused, then answered. Bradley formally withdrew from representing the Whitakers in disclosure matters. That surprised him. A little, not completely. The signs had been there. What does that mean? It means he no longer wants ownership of the situation. Interesting, very interesting. After the call ended, Stefan sat quietly in his office. The afternoon sun filled the room. Outside, employees loaded equipment into company vehicles. Another ordinary workday, exactly the way he liked it. His phone vibrated once. A text message, unknown number, the same number, the anonymous sender. Stefan opened it. The message contained only one sentence. You were never supposed to read Clause 14. He stared at the screen, then read it again. Not because the words were complicated, because they confirmed something he had suspected from the beginning. The clause wasn't the mistake. Ignoring the clause was. And whoever had been helping him all along clearly knew that better than anyone. 6 months later, Charleston had moved on. At least publicly. People always did. Scandals became rumors. Rumors became stories. Stories became forgotten. The city remained exactly what it had always been. Busy marinas, historic streets, construction projects, tourists, business deals. Life rarely paused for anyone's personal disaster. Stefan preferred it that way. The spring air carried the scent of salt water as he walked through a newly renovated distribution facility near the port. 2 years earlier, the building had been mostly empty. Today, it housed one of Harbor Gate Security's largest commercial monitoring centers. Rows of screens covered one wall. Technicians monitored dozens of properties throughout South Carolina and Georgia. The business had grown steadily, not explosively, steadily, the way Stefan liked. Predictable growth, careful expansion, no unnecessary risks, no headlines, no drama, just results. A project manager approached holding a clipboard. Everything's ready for the Savannah rollout. Stefan nodded. Good. The manager left. Another ordinary conversation. Another ordinary day. Exactly the kind of life Stefan had spent years building. Later that afternoon, he met Ryan Mercer for lunch at a small seafood restaurant overlooking Shem Creek, the same place where they had reviewed the first disclosure schedules months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Ryan arrived carrying a newspaper, not because people still relied on newspapers, because old habits were difficult to break. He dropped into a chair. "Have you seen this?" Stefan glanced at the folded page. A local business publication, nothing unusual, until he noticed the headline, "Whitaker Development Withdraws from Waterfront Redevelopment Proposal." Stefan looked up. Ryan shrugged. "Looks like the city selected someone else." That wasn't entirely surprising. Several large projects had become increasingly competitive. Still, the article contained details, investor concerns, additional reviews, extended due diligence, nothing catastrophic, nothing dramatic, yet enough. Pressure accumulated slowly, just like trust, just like consequences. Ryan took a sip of coffee. "You know, people still talk about the prenup thing." Stefan smiled faintly. "They need better hobbies." Ryan laughed. "Probably." The conversation moved elsewhere. Business, investments, future opportunities, normal things. Neither spent much time discussing the Whitakers. The story felt finished, or mostly finished. At least Stefan thought so. 3 weeks later, he discovered otherwise. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, an unknown number. Normally he ignored those. Something made him answer, "Hello." A brief pause followed. Then a familiar voice. "Hi, Stefan." Lauren. The sound surprised him, not because he never expected to hear from her again, because he realized how long it had been. Months. Actual months. He sat back in his office chair. "Lauren." Another pause. Then she laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because both of them suddenly recognized how strange the conversation felt. "I wasn't sure you'd answer. I wasn't sure you'd call." Fair enough. The silence that followed felt different than previous silences, less tense, less defensive. Time had a way of removing certain emotions, not all of them, just enough. Eventually, Lauren spoke again. "Can we meet?" Stefan considered the question, then answered honestly. "Why, I owe you something." The response sounded rehearsed, yet sincere. After a moment, he agreed. The following Saturday, they met at a small diner outside downtown Charleston. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. The kind of place Stefan genuinely liked. Lauren arrived exactly on time. Another thing that surprised him, she looked different, not physically, not dramatically, just different. Simpler, more relaxed. The carefully polished image she used to carry seemed diminished. Perhaps intentionally. They ordered coffee. For a while, neither spoke about the past. Instead, they discussed ordinary things, work, family, life. The conversation felt strangely normal. Then Lauren finally set down her coffee cup. "My father sold the waterfront parcel." Stefan nodded. He had heard rumors. Nothing more. Lauren continued. "The project fell apart." There was no bitterness in her voice, just acceptance. "He blames a lot of people." Stefan wasn't surprised. People who built identities around being right often struggled when reality disagreed. Lauren looked out the window, then back toward him. "You know what the worst part was?" Stefan waited. "I spent months thinking you were attacking my family." The words arrived quietly, without excuses, without defenses, just honesty. Stefan listened. Lauren continued. "And the entire time you were asking perfectly reasonable questions." Neither spoke for a moment. The diner remained busy around them. Waitresses moved between tables. Families talked. Coffee cups clinked. Normal life. Lauren smiled sadly. "I didn't see it." Stefan thought about that, then shook his head. "Maybe you didn't want to." The honesty landed. Lauren nodded slowly. "That's fair." For the first time since the breakup, the conversation felt completely real. No arguments, no positioning, no attempts to win, just two people discussing what happened. Lauren eventually laughed. "You know, something funny." Stefan raised an eyebrow. My brother still thinks you planned everything. That actually made him smile. Of course he does. Lauren laughed too, a genuine laugh this time. The first genuine one he had heard from her in a very long time. Then she asked a question, one Stefan had anticipated. Did you ever tell them? Tell them what? How much you actually own? Stefan laughed softly. No. Lauren stared at him, then shook her head. You still haven't? No. Why? The answer came easily, because it had always been true. Because it wasn't relevant. Lauren looked at him for several seconds, then smiled, not with regret, with understanding. Finally, actual understanding. You really never cared what they thought. Stefan considered that, then corrected her. I cared. Lauren looked surprised. I just didn't let it decide who I was. The words settled between them, simple, accurate, complete. Eventually the conversation ended, not because either wanted it to, because there wasn't much left to say. Outside the diner, the afternoon sun reflected across parked cars. Lauren stood beside hers. For a moment, neither moved. Then she spoke. I'm glad you didn't sign it. The statement surprised him, not because of the words, because of who said them. Lauren smiled, a small smile, the kind he remembered from years earlier. So am I. Then she climbed into her car, started the engine, and drove away. Stefan watched until she disappeared into traffic. There was no sadness this time, no anger, no unfinished argument, just closure, the kind that arrives quietly, without permission, without warning, without drama. As he walked back toward his truck, his phone vibrated. A new business notification. Another property acquisition had closed earlier that morning. A warehouse complex outside Savannah. A solid investment. Another steady step forward. Stefan smiled, then climbed into the driver's seat. The past remained where it belonged, behind him, and for the first time in a very long while, that felt exactly right. 9 months after the prenup meeting, Stefan West stood on the back porch of a house that nobody from the Whitaker family had ever visited. The house sat along a quiet stretch of river outside Charleston. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to impress. A long wooden dock extended into the water. Spanish moss hung from old oak trees. The evening sun painted gold across the surface of the river. It was exactly the kind of place Stefan had always wanted. Private, peaceful, honest. A place that didn't need to prove anything, much like the man standing there. Inside the house, boxes still waited to be unpacked. A move completed only weeks earlier. Not because Stefan needed a larger home, because he wanted a different one. A fresh chapter, a different view, a different rhythm. The river provided that. So did the silence. His phone vibrated on the outdoor table. Another notification. Another Harbor Gate acquisition finalized. The company had expanded into 3 states: South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina. Commercial monitoring contracts continued growing. New warehouse facilities came online. Additional investment properties as symptoms generated steady income. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. The same approach that had always worked. Patient decisions, long horizons, consistent effort. Stefan looked across the river. The setting sun reflected off the water. Years earlier, he might have considered the moment a victory. Now it felt different. Not victory, perspective. Those were not the same thing. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Stefan turned. A black SUV sat near the driveway. Unexpected, not entirely unwelcome. He walked toward the front of the house. Lauren stood beside the vehicle. For several seconds, neither spoke. The last time they had met, things ended peacefully. Yet seeing her here still felt surprising. She smiled first. Nice place. Stefan glanced around. Thank you. Lauren looked toward the river. I can see why you bought it. He nodded. So can I. The answer made her laugh softly. The tension disappeared almost immediately. Time had removed most of it. Not all. Enough. Stefan invited her onto the porch. They sat facing the water. 2 people who once planned a wedding, now simply sharing a conversation. Nothing more, nothing less. Lauren looked around again. No security gates. No mansion. No marble floors. Stefan smiled. Lauren shook her head. You really are impossible. The comment carried affection now, not frustration. A long silence followed, comfortable this time. The river moved slowly before them. A fishing boat passed in the distance. The evening remained calm. Eventually, Lauren reached into her purse. She removed an envelope, placed it on the table. Stefan looked at it. What is it? A letter. From who? My father. That answer surprised him. A little. Lauren noticed. He won't say it himself. Stefan nodded. That sounded accurate. Lauren continued, but he asked me to deliver it. Stefan didn't open the envelope, not immediately. Instead, he looked toward the water. How is he? Lauren smiled sadly. Still William Whitaker. Another accurate answer. She continued. The company survived. Stefan expected that. Whitaker Development had resources, experience, relationships. Problems rarely destroyed organizations that large. They simply changed them. Lauren folded her hands. He's different now. Stefan raised an eyebrow. How? Lauren thought for a moment, then answered honestly. He reads contracts himself. The response caught him completely off guard. For the first time all evening he laughed, a genuine laugh. Lauren joined him. The sound carried across the river. For a moment the years between them seemed smaller, then silence returned. Stefan finally opened the envelope. The letter inside was brief, very brief. No elaborate apology, no dramatic confession, just several handwritten paragraphs. William acknowledged mistakes, acknowledged assumptions, acknowledged that he had underestimated someone he never bothered to understand. The wording sounded exactly like William. Direct, controlled, uncomfortable, which somehow made it more believable. When Stefan finished reading, he folded the letter carefully, then placed it back inside the envelope. Lauren watched him. That's all, Stefan smiled. What were you expecting? I don't know. Neither did she. That was the truth. Because closure rarely looked the way people imagined. Sometimes it arrived as a courtroom victory, sometimes as revenge, sometimes as public humiliation, and sometimes as a short letter carried by a person who once mattered. Stefan looked toward Lauren. I appreciate it. She nodded, then took a deep breath. The expression on her face changed. More serious now, more personal. I owe you something too. Stefan remained quiet, waiting. Lauren looked down at her hands, then back at him. When all this started, I thought you were refusing the prenup. The words came slowly, carefully. Stefan listened. Lauren continued. But that's not what happened. No, it wasn't the agreement. No. Another pause. Then she finally understood it completely. You were refusing the way they saw you. Stefan considered the statement, then shook his head slightly. Not exactly. Lauren waited. The river moved quietly behind them. The sun dipped lower. Everything felt still. Finally, Stefan spoke. The prenup wasn't the problem. Lauren watched him carefully. The missing disclosures weren't even the real problem. She said nothing because she wanted the answer, the real answer. Stefan looked out across the water, then back toward her. I was refusing a marriage built on assumptions. The words settled gently between them. No anger, no bitterness, just truth. Stefan continued. Everyone assumed they knew who I was. Lauren lowered her eyes. They didn't. No. And I didn't stop them. That part mattered too. He had allowed it, allowed people to underestimate him, allowed them to create their own story. The difference was that most people eventually became curious. The Whitakers never did. Lauren nodded slowly. Tears never appeared. Neither did dramatic emotion, just understanding, the kind that arrives late, but arrives nonetheless. Eventually she stood. The conversation had reached its natural end. Before leaving, she looked around the property one last time. The dock, the river, the house, the life. Simple, comfortable, real. You know what's funny? Stefan smiled. What My family spent months worrying you'd take our assets. He already knew where this was going. Lauren laughed softly. The whole time they never realized you had your own. Stefan shook his head. That was never important. Lauren smiled. That's why they lost. The statement lingered. Then she climbed into her SUV, started the engine, and drove away. This time there would be no future meeting, no unfinished conversation, no unresolved question. The story had reached its ending. Stefan returned to the porch. The river reflected the final light of sunset. He unfolded William's letter one last time, then folded it again, carefully, not because he needed it, because it represented something important, proof that people could eventually see the truth, even if it took longer than expected. On the table beside him sat another document, a Harbor Gate acquisition agreement waiting for his signature. Stefan picked up the pen, signed his name, and smiled. Because the clause they ignored had changed far more than a contract. It had revealed who belonged at the table and who didn't. Some people think strength means speaking the loudest, reacting the fastest, or winning every argument. But stories like Stefan's remind us that real strength often looks much quieter. It looks like patience. It looks like preparation. It looks like asking reasonable questions when everyone else wants blind agreement. The truth rarely needs volume. It only needs time. Many of us have experienced moments when people judged us based on appearances, jobs, income, education, or circumstances. Sometimes the people making those judgments are strangers. Sometimes they're the people sitting closest to us. The lesson isn't to prove them wrong through anger. The lesson is to keep building, keep learning, and let facts speak when the moment arrives. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they knew your worth without truly knowing you? What happened and how did you handle it? Share your story in the comments. I'd genuinely like to read it. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's story features another quiet person everyone dismissed right up until the day the truth finally caught up with them.